today we'll be here with Kai and Wayetu Moore. Huang Chong-Kai of Taiwan is a fiction writer and member of Alphabet Lab, a collective of experimental writers and theorists in Taiwan. His own novel, The Contents of the Times, won the 2018 TIBE Book Prize for Fiction and was one of Mirror Media Review's 10 best books of 2017. So congratulations on that. Wayetu Moore debut novel, She Would Be King, was released by Grey Wolf Press. Moore is the founder of One More Book. One More Book is a 501c3 nonprofit organization that encourages reading among children of countries with low literacy rates and underrepresented cultures. She is currently a Margaret Mead Fellow at Columbia University Teachers College, where she is researching the impact of culturally relevant curriculum and learning aids in elementary classrooms of underrepresented groups. In this panel, writers will be discussing some of their favorite writings by others, sharing the things they like to read and important books they would like to recommend. Thanks for coming. Oh, by the way, we also have I never got your name.
Michael.
Mike. Mike will be the one who will be heading the panelists and having the conversation. So thanks for all coming, and go ahead.
Thanks. We're going to start very broadly asking Kai and Wayetu about how technology tools play into their lives as writers. Obviously, computers and word processors, but beyond that, into social media, web presence, and any other elements that how technology might impact their day-to-day. Take it away.
Thank you for coming, and my English is not very well, so I wrote some notes on my smartphone. Yeah, technology. Yeah. And okay. So I will read my notes, and it might be 7 or 8 minutes. I think writing is like a battle letter and waiting for someone to receive it. This is an old way of communication. I write just like wrapping a lot of information in the form of literature. People receive this might have some insights or comprehensions in the reading process, and then link to other works, authors, or things. I want to be optimistic about technology. When I was a college student in 2000, personal computers began to spread, and mobile phone became popular. I was the generation that grew up with information technology. At that time, blogs began to appear, followed by Twitter and then Facebook. The iPhone appeared in 2007, changing the way people use their phones and how they connect to each other. We are indeed more exposed to a lot of information than in the past, and it is easy to find a variety of information. At the same time, we were also overwhelmed by a lot of information. The amount of text that everyone reads every day is actually far more than the past. But it is relatively fragmented, scattered, and unorganized. We can know a lot of things and doesn't need to remember too much at once. Just pick up the phone and go online to get relevant information. Now we don't remember the phone numbers of relatives or friends. before
Yeah.
the cell phone
Yeah, of
time,
course. Yeah.
we all have a friend, maybe can remember everyone's phone number. Yeah. And the technology changed that. And now we cannot remember the names of stores or streets. We use picture or post and Google to help us remember. This are just like our cloud storage. But even I'm drawing in such large of information, I still believe that good verses still shine with a unique light. Even Twitter, Facebook are filled with bad points and bad sentence, but good points will be even more dazzling. The carrier or container of literature is language. So when it appears on a web page, printed on toilet paper or a book, it doesn't detract from its literalness. But we are often tired before we found a real good poem on the internet. The cruelty of literature is that it requires you to dedicate all your strength, but doesn't guarantee that you will be rewarded. And technology always gives you entertainment and rewards, letting you rely on and exhaust your energy little by little. So today's writers face a different situation than in the past. For example, I'm thinking about what to say this time. I want to write some notes, but when I turn on my computer, I open Facebook, Gmail, and the Major League homepage. I want to know who won the game, yeah. And after I patrolled these sites, I opened a blank Word file. I had a hard time focusing on what I want to write and thinking about how to organize these messy ideas. A large part of literary creation is personal battle. You have to face it yourself. You can't ask for help. You must fight against this evil writing dragon. After that fight, you survive and be able to show what you have written to others. In this process, you can only get along with yourself, not with others. This is a violation of the common sense of today's technology. When you finish your work and connect with others, you will fully feel the fun of the link. You can talk to friends about your work, the books you read, the movie you have watched, the music you have heard, and so on. But before that, you have to do your own work. The essence of literature is to fight against the erosion of time. The essence of technology is changing with every day. In the past, people only had two worlds. One was the real world, and the other was the imaginary world. Literature belongs to the imaginary world. The author is sometimes like a medium that connects two worlds. He is based on the real world and bring people to the imaginary world. But the internet has changed this state. Outside two worlds, virtual worlds have emerged. I'm actually pessimistic. I think that writers who are still writing in pure text today will be the authors of the last generation of thinking, writing, and imagining in pure text. The author of the future, he may create an entire virtual world, building the storyline, scenes, art design, music, and other details, like the situation of TV series Westworld or Black Mirror. At present, such a game designer has been able to complete the production of an entire video game. That is to say, when we talk about writing, we no longer just refer to literary writing. It may expand the scope, including writing in different programming language and building basic details in digital way. It can be said that literature makes us seem to see the world of imagination. The film is visualize the world of imagination, and technology is making the virtual world accommodate various senses and become experiential. If you have money and leisure, you can use these technologies to enjoy different sensory pleasures. But for the disadvantaged group, technology may be a deeper and deeper gap. This is the cruelty of technology. It is also controlled by the various capital of the real world. Money, culture, knowledge, etc. If you have resources, you can use a variety of advanced devices. If you don't, then wait for cheap, poor, or pirated versions. We use our information to exchange usage rights in the internet. All websites ask you to register, give them your personal information, because these are the most valuable things in our time. You can imagine how much personal information a multinational corporation like Apple, Amazon, Google, and Facebook has. As long as you use the products of these companies and link them, you will be into a bit of big data. The more you use this technology, the more this company know you, because all the network footprints are recorded, and you are contributing a piece of effort to make this company stronger. So, before, we all know the 1984. Before, Big Brother was watching you, and now big data is watching you. Thanks for the user, technology makes it easy for you to find people with similar interests and find a group with a sense of belonging. But at the same time, it is the daily test of people's imagination of boundaries. Our situation is like a tribal life, and there are exchanges, contradictions, or conflicts between different tribes. In the past, we could hardly detect such a tribal state. It doesn't mean that it doesn't exist. It just shows through technology. This comes down to the proposition: how do we understand the others, and how do we live together? This old proposition is not changed by technology. So in the end, I still have been optimistic that reading literature in the offline state may give you time to get along with yourself and to understand others deeply. Then we carry this understanding, go online. Thank you.
Thank you, Kai. I think that was really great. So I guess I wanted to make 3 points to what you said, and then feel free to give your input. The first is, like, I think at the fundamental level of writing, you did mention word processors. We're able to write down our thoughts at the speed that we're having them in a way that sometimes the free form doesn't allow. However, I do find myself pretty regularly longing for the nostalgia and just the comfort of having to handwrite on a page. And so when I feel stuck or when I have writer's block, I'll usually pull out my journal and I'll write. And I find that it comes and it flows in a way that's very different from when I'm trying to type. Secondly, you mentioned social media, and with regard to social media, so I live in New York. The literary community there is pretty insular, and there's some of these like unspoken rules that I'll say that exist there. Of course, there's one of them is like, know how to answer, what are you reading? The second one is have a natural aversion to Los Angeles. And then the third is you're expected to have like a natural aversion to social media, because it's sort of seen as this thing that's consumed by the masses, and so not intellectual, not cool by literary standards. And so I found myself initially when I joined social media and knowing that I was around these groups that would just like slam people who were, engaging in Instagram and Facebook, with the exception of Twitter, because writers love Twitter. But if you're on Instagram or Facebook, it's sort of seen as something different. And I found myself afraid. I was like, oh, should I post this? Because I don't want to seem like I'm too into I guess, popular culture, because that is very much looked down upon. And that's interesting, because then you have sort of the reverse effect going on. Whereas I think at some point, writers, a lot of us, because we're so shy and sensitive and somewhat empathetic, probably went through periods in our lives when we were being picked on, but then like we found ways to sort of silo and pick on others who are too mass or trying to be too popular. And that's why you find that, Yrsa Daley Ward and Rupi Kaur and some of these other writers and poets who try to gain a following on social media, they are largely rejected by the literary industry, like, oh, that's not real poetry. They're too popular to be considered real poets. And obviously some of what they're writing is for the purpose of sharing. And so it probably doesn't take as much thought, or it doesn't engage with language in the way that I think like contemporary or formal poets do. And so that gets looked down upon. So you find that dynamic happening a lot. Like, do I post this? Should I post this? But I would say to that, it would be an oversight, I would say, for the contemporary writer not to engage with as many of these mediums as possible, because readers are on these mediums now and are looking and engaging and looking at these platforms for, what to read or what to be interested in. And I think at even the basic level, being a writer or being someone who people are reading, they want to know what you're thinking, how you're spending your day. So even on that level, I think it could be helpful to connect with readers. And then thirdly, it's like how social media and how technology affects writers. But I would go further and say that social media and technology actually really affect the literary industry. Because if you find that when Syria was in the news pretty heavily, then within the literary industry and infrastructure, then they were looking for books by Syrians. Does anyone know of a Syrian memoir or like a Syrian novelist? Because they know that it's going to sell. And right now, my book, it is speculative fiction. Most of it is based in Africa. And in 2015, it was very hard to sell because they were saying, oh, well, the comps are, maybe Octavia Butler, Ben Okri, and these are all old people. If you're an African immigrant, why aren't you writing an immigrant story, right? So Black or African diaspora fantasy, speculative fiction, largely rejected and, not something that the literary industry wanted to pick up. Fast forward 3 years, Black Panther happens, right? The beginning of 2018, Black Panther comes out, and now everything that they're purchasing has to do with, African fantasy. That's something that the literary industry is indulging in and really craving right now, and that's because of the response from the masses. They're getting their tips of what to indulge in and what to purchase from things like Twitter, from things like Instagram, how many people are engaging, how many hits can you have, and so yeah, those I would say are the three things that stood out to me in terms of how technology right now, from a contemporary vantage point, affects writing in the literary industry.
Kai, you mentioned I like your phrase, expand the scope of writing, and you were talking about writing in computer language and designing these large-scale digital environments. And listening to Wayetu talk about the aversion to social media, it sounds like that's another way, a possibly even more direct way that contemporary writers could expand their definition of what writing is, when they're resistant to it. Resistance in the sense that it's seen as mainstream in a peculiar way, that I think in a peculiar way, because there's a certain level of cultivation that one has for their network on social media, and one can cultivate a network that is perhaps still the non-mainstream, I suppose, in a way. That comes to the question then of in what ways can contemporary writers negotiate this resistance of being mainstream with the necessity of it? As you described, publishers are very much looking at what's trending. I suppose a writer needs to somehow engage in a way to make their living. Is that an accurate assessment?
I mean, some of them do, and then some of them don't. They're writers, really wonderful writers, who don't engage with social media at all, aren't on it, or they might have an account and they never post. Marlon James has an Instagram account and he's never posted, but he still amasses followers. And there are a lot of writers on Twitter and in these other mediums that are the same way. And so I think like it's whatever works. I think that what happens though when you do engage, then you sort of risk being seen as more as a mainstream writer by your peers, and for some reason that's something that's looked down upon. Like, you don't want to be too mass, you want to be niche, you want to be literary fiction, you want to be accepted by your peers in a way that seems exclusivist. And so if you are engaging in becoming mainstream, then that takes some of the allure out of what you have to offer, right? And I think that's really unfortunate, because it's a huge miss on these I would say populations that really, really depend on social media. For instance, I'm Liberian, and in Liberia, when I go to Monrovia, there are few people who have computers and laptops, but they all have smartphones. You'll go up country to the villages and you'll see that people have phones and they have smartphones, and it's their way of participating with globalization. It's their way of keeping in touch with what's going on in America and what's going on in the East and what's going on in Europe. And so these are individuals who previously would not have an opportunity to engage with what's going on in a place like America, or the poetry that might be posted on Instagram, but then all of a sudden they have access to it. And I think that that's really beautiful. So to totally reject that is a huge miss. And I think that in finding that balance, it's really, if it begins to distract what we're offering, then maybe it needs to be checked and reassessed. But if it isn't distracting, it's just a way for you to relate to or connect with readers, then I just don't find any issue with it.
I was thinking as you were speaking, I find the mentality of rejecting social media and rejecting this idea of using social media as a tool, I find it similar to the mindset of those that reject contemporary fiction or writers of color or global writers in favor of the canon, in that there is a strict definition of what writing is, and anything that is outside of that is somehow faulting or faulted.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely.
And Kai, I go back to your expanding the scope of writing, as I'm really struck with your comparison to Westworld and Black Mirror, imagining a future writer as not just putting words on a page, but building a full immersive environment and leveraging the multitude of expanding tools to that end. And I suppose then the question is, what does a writer need to start learning if that is an ultimate reality. How can a writer who's working now, if they're this is a big question, I know. Tell us how to solve writing. No, but is this a realistic dream, or is it sort of an idealized plateau of sort of the Everest of immersive fiction or immersive writing?
So I really pessimistic, about writing in the letters or in the words, and just use the pure text. And I think we are, and including us, we are the last generation, because I think next generation they face another digital environment changing, and they have to learn a lot of skill to survive in that environment. And I think in our generation, our parents or our grandparents' generation, they don't imagine what happened in our environment in our time. Because a lot of old men, old lady, they still don't use the smartphone. Because it's too complicated to them. And so I think although we have a very long literature history, but I think it will be changed or transformed into another type or another situation. So I think because I'm old dog now, compared with the new generation, or I can do is writing, and still writing what I want,
Do I have anything to add? No.
Can I ask a question on that?
Yeah.
So is that not our fault a little bit for not being like our parents a little bit? Not that we can't embrace the technology, but if we look at the whole picture of everything, like the storytelling and being able to unplug for a little bit, is that not our generation's fault for not passing that storytelling ability down to the next generation? And constantly have both? Can we not have both the technology and the storytelling ability in the same world, in a sense? That based off of what you were talking about, Kai, I think that there's something to be said about unplugging for a moment and getting back to the old ways, as well as the new ways. And you said it yourself, that, or you did more, that the one thing that we need to do every once in a while is unplug ourselves by writing on paper. I write all the time, short stories, comics, and like that. I think it's important that we unplug for a moment and we embrace that side. And so when we do these literature talks, that maybe that would be a moment where we can say, hey, if we unplug ourselves, we can have both worlds. We can still have technology, which means we get out there and we spread ourselves further out because of technology and all the people that wouldn't see us otherwise. But on the other hand, we also would have the real world sense of what that balance, like that. What do you guys think?
I think like music, we listen music all the time, and when we are very old, raised in the maybe thousand years ago, and music still company with the human being, but in 20th century, we all know the form, container of music changed. In the first we have vinyl, and then we have tape, and then we have CD, and then we don't need this thing we just go in a digital way. But now you can find the vinyl come back, and to listen music by vinyl way is like a old school way, but it means it changed the meaning for to the listening music, yeah. And so I think like writing also maybe the same situation. We will still have some writer just write in pure text, and there are some writer tell story by other ways, yeah, maybe digital way or something. Now we cannot imagine what way, yeah.
I have a number of thoughts. So I think technology is an eventuality, it's inevitable, and it's not going to go anywhere. So I think we will periodically have these countercultures, as you mentioned before, of music going in a certain direction, and then all of a sudden we're embracing vinyl again because it's nostalgic, and we're sort of raging against the contemporary forms of engaging with the music industry. And technology will be the same. You have even now people who say, oh, I'm going offline, or I canceled all my social media accounts for a month. But that doesn't mean social media is going to go anywhere. That doesn't mean technology is going to go anywhere. And I think that when art marries commerce, it becomes something else. Most commercial industries right now are engaging with pretty aggressively the digital world. And I think to reject that or to say, oh, maybe we want to step back a little is short-sighted. I think within the literary industry, we actually should be trying to think of how we can evolve with it and how we can be more inventive as opposed to reacting to it. Because it's like, okay, well, right now we have audiobooks, the Kindle, and that really is the extent of the literary industry's engagement with the digital world. Otherwise, we reject it. But who's to say that oral historians or the oral form of storytelling that still exists in many parts of the continent of Africa, we can't invent something as those in the literary industry that makes, listening to these stories or preserves these stories in a way that doesn't water down or dilute the experience, right? But the thing is, we're reactive. We're not thinking in terms of innovation. We're not engaging with this industry in a way that puts us at the forefront or in a way that's mindful of readers and what our readers are doing. And that's why less and less people are reading, because we do have antiquated methods of engaging with readers. The truth is, most readers are on social media. Most readers are engaging with the digital world and with their computers in ways that we're not accounting for. So it's like, okay, well, people have their smartphones now, so let's create a Kindle and a Nook. And so it's always reactionary, it's not proactive. And so I would say, considering the inevitability of this growth and expansion, within the literary industry, we should actually be thinking about how we can innovate to be part of that, and how we can attract more readers, and how we can engage and expand the way that we are consuming stories.
Yeah, I'll take a moment to speak to you. You're talking about less people are reading. I come from an education background, and there's been some research in the field about how adolescents engage with text in a day. And some research has indicated that they're engaging with more words per day than people 15 years ago did, but doing so in shorter bursts.
Yes.
Doing so in text messages, in short pieces of reading on social media sites or other youth-oriented or hip sites. Okay. I think first of BuzzFeed as an example. They're short, pithy, direct articles. But over the course of a day, people in high school and middle school are engaging with more text than I did 20 years ago when I was in high school.
Well, let me revise. Less people are reading books.
Right.
Yes.
But my point in saying that is that you're very right in saying that writing and publishing has to take that into account, because people aren't not reading, they're just reading very differently. And high school teachers like I was are partly to blame because we're moving into like, oh, let's just teach short stories instead of novels.
Yeah.
The novel is being slowly taken out of a secondary classroom, but that's a separate conversation.
Yeah.
I want to circle back to something you said earlier, Wayetu, about participating in a global society and participating in globalization through smartphones and technology. I want to parallel that with the way that readers participate in a text that they're reading and with the author that they're reading. Technology and social media especially have sort of shrunk the world in a very interesting way, and also lifted the mystical veil of the author that we might have argued existed a while ago, where a reader's interaction with the author was strictly through their work. Or if they happen to travel to a reading and meet them there. Now there's an opportunity for those that are participants in the social media to interact with their readers and readers interact with the writers, shrinking that world. I'm weaving a tangled web of a question here. I guess the question is thinking about this idea of globalization and shrinking the world as a writer, and how again, I keep harping on the question of leveraging this tool. Is there a way to do that? How can we do that? What's the power of recognizing the smaller world?
Yeah. So when I first started to engage with social media, I would post pictures of my puppy and things like that. I no longer have them, but I would post pictures of my dog, and every once in a while, maybe once every 4 weeks or something. And I don't tweet. I'm not really active on Twitter. Facebook, I'll usually just post like articles and things like that every once in a while. And now that I'm on tour dates, but Instagram is my method of choice. And at that time, I would post periodically, but just really wasn't engaging. Didn't care much about Instagram. And I remember that I'd read an article about how often people open up people wake up in the morning and they open up Instagram, something like that. And they are engaging with Instagram in a way that gives them access to some of these poets, these like Instagram poets, that also get a bad rep in the literary industry. And I remember, so when I was in high school, I would journal haiku to practice rhythm. And I posted a haiku, and I started learning about hashtags and how people can find some of this material. And over the course of maybe 8 months, my following grew, by thousands. And it's because I was engaging in a way that I knew that people responded to. And I'd no longer post haiku, but these are the same people who are saying, oh, well, what are you working on? And who, when my book came out 3 weeks ago, bought my book and will come out to readings. And so I think that if, for instance, I brought up Marlon James before just because I'm reading his gallery right now, but if these writers that we've grown to love and respect were to engage with these forms of media, and even if it's just like a snippet of what you're writing, oh my gosh, we'd go crazy. But there is such an aversion to it that we don't even know the potential of these mediums yet because we aren't using them in the ways that we can and probably should to reach readers. And then your question about globalization, where it can go. I wrote a haiku last year at some point that I'd put on Instagram, and a Japanese poet had followed the hashtag, and he said, oh, actually, I translate these into Japanese, and in the comment section had written a translation. And I just thought, this is so incredible. This is so amazing. These are people who you would never interact with. I will never interact with physically. Likely I won't. But you do get to reach on these platforms. And I just think that's so powerful. And I think that if we don't wake up and start to explore and imagine or reimagine how these platforms can be used for the benefit of literature and literacy, then that number of people who are still reading books is going to continue to dwindle, unfortunately. And I don't know if maybe that's the intent. Maybe the canon wants to stay exclusivist and the canon doesn't want to be consumed by the masses. Maybe that's the intention. But if it is the intention, I would think that that's very unfortunate.
I think, for example, I'm this year IWP participant, and I met the other 26 countries writers, and after this residence, we go back our home, and how do we contact with each other? We use technology. Yeah, I can follow everyone's Facebook or Twitter or Instagram, and just like your situation. Yeah, you write some haiku and Japanese poet maybe found this Instagram and follow you. Yeah, but we cannot know every language.
Yeah.
So we always use the Google Translator or something like that, and to catch some meaning in that reply. Yeah, and in the IWP, my experience is we cannot use English very well, and English might be our second or third language. And so we just use a very unfrequently English and try to know each other. But after that, we still have to write our work. And so if we don't have technology, it's harder to us to know each other. Yeah, because when we talk with our experience, our literary work, our literature career, like that. And we always found, how do I say that? And I have to take my iPhone and use the Google Translate. Oh, is this mean? This mean? Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, and then these apps are also really smart. So when I was in France in maybe August or so, if you go to Instagram and you're searching maybe French hashtags and everything that you're seeing is in French, it'll ask you, should I translate this? And you say yes, and it'll translate it for you. So these apps continue to evolve, and so that's hopeful as well.
Great, thank you. I think we have some time for questions from our audience, if we have any. Yeah.
So I have a question about distraction of two sorts. So one is at the personal level as a writer, how do you allow yourself the discipline not to be distracted by intrusions of technology in your daily life? It's true for all professionals. But I think for writers, some peace of mind is very important, right? So number one, on a daily level, daily basis, how do you do that? And then for, I think, the readers, I find it particularly distracting these days when mega celebrities endorse an author or a book. And so the celebrity's complete list of followers becomes followers of an author. So it's not the author's contact, but the celebrity's contact. So there's lots of distraction away from what we might call as the truth and the discipline required to enjoy literature. How do we deal with it as a society?
I have a question for you. Why is it a negative thing if celebrities endorse writers?
I'm not so sure. I'm not so sure. But it seems to me this is the exact form of American commercialisation that happens in a lot of fields. And how it where it heads.
Yeah.
It's very monopolistic. And you understand that winner takes all systems. But my God, it's what does it do to all the thousands of other authors? Right? It can't be just one winner.
So I would say that like for instance, I'll give Oprah's book club as an example. The money that these authors and these publishers make from books that get placed on lists like that and ultimately benefit the publishing house, the publisher is then able to acquire more of these unknown writers, right? So it all feeds into each other. That isn't necessarily, the more people that you can get to read and patronize, even if they're just unfortunately buying the book for decoration because they want to have the Oprah's Book Club sticker on their coffee table, that sale is going back to this publishing house, which is then going back to these writers who may be relatively unknown. And so that's a way to look at it as well. In terms of distraction, I think I've always dealt with a short attention span. So before there were phones, before the internet, I'll find something else to do or to think about. I literally will sit in front of a pen and pad for like hours and just like thinking, just looking at whatever. So now, obviously the apps fill that time, but before then there was something else. And I think what I do personally is I just have it designated 2 hours every day where I force myself to kind of center and write. And then outside of that, if I write outside of that, then yes, wonderful. But I'm not as hard on myself if I choose to open up an app. As long as I have that 1 to 2 hours every day where I'm by myself, I have my turtle time and I'm writing. So yes, it's hard because then now you have presidential alerts or whatever that's coming up on the phone. It's like, oh, what is happening right now? But I think it is attainable. It just takes every day, like ritualistic. I think you can force yourself.
Yeah, I really agree with Wayetu. Yeah, and she has discipline. Yeah, I'm really sure. Yeah, okay. I think to be a writer, maybe you have to do your job every day for a long time, and I think the Portuguese novelist José Saramago, he has a really good advice for writing. 2 pages one day. Yeah, you just write 2 pages a day and a day by day, and you will get your work. Yeah, and I think if you can write 2 pages in the morning, and you have a whole afternoon and whole night to spend or waste your time on the internet. Yeah, yeah. And I think, and second question, I think is about authority, and is the authority in our time is really hard and big question, and I'm also pessimistic. Yeah. Because maybe in 15 or 20 years after, people all have a 3D printer, and that 3D printer, maybe you can print every book you want, yeah, and you can print and buy your design, yeah. You got the text, and you can print it, the book, and doesn't need any permission from the publishing house because they don't know. Yeah, yeah, and so authority is a really big question in today. Yeah, and for example, we contribute a lot of information, a lot of text, a lot of video on YouTube, on Facebook, on Twitter. And if one day this huge company shut down, we all lost this information. So who got the information? And this I think it's need us to think about this question, how we can face and how we can maybe have some solution. I don't know. Yeah.
We have time for a couple more questions.
I just was going to say, so you guys are both fictional writers, like that. So my one question would be on technology is, do you guys use online? I mean, obviously the problem with the internet is there's so many opinions, and a lot of it isn't factual, and you don't know what is or what isn't. Do you guys use the internet for, one question is, for research? I mean, it opens the door for
Absolutely.
a lot more research without having to travel a great distance.
Yeah.
Like that. Do you find yourself using that for that kind of realm?
Incredible.
Like that?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I did a lot of my research online. A lot of it was in libraries, a lot of it was in Liberia, just speaking to people, but a good bit of research was done online. And not only that, some doors were open because I had an essay online that referenced my third great grandfather, who was a man in South Carolina, and he left to go to Liberia in 1871. He was one of the settlers. And someone from the town that he was from had been doing research, online research, about this group that emigrated from South Carolina to Liberia, and reached out and told me, hey, I think that my third great grandfather owned your third great grandmother because of the research that I've been doing. That would have never happened without like the internet and without like this being able to have the Atlantic online and people everywhere can read it as opposed to only those who can afford it, right? And then the next level of that, other than affordability and accessibility, is then you have your email. So then you can contact anybody that you want to. And I think that it makes the world smaller, and in some ways that is scary because then you have people who have access to you and your information who maybe shouldn't. But then those who do useful things with it and are really being intentional about how they're going about using these platforms, I think it could be really wonderful.
And the other question to go along with that, since you have your own company, one more book, and like that, do you use technology? That's one of the ways you're going to get out there is to do that. And are you like self-published, or are you still working with publishers as well? And then
Yeah.
kind of like both worlds.
So One More Book is a children's book publishing company that I created. It's a nonprofit publisher, and we have about 23 books for the children of Liberia, Guinea, Haiti. We have a Brazil book we paired with Afro-Brazilian writers and publishers. And so when I initially began the company, I wrote the first 4 children's books. I'm not a children's book writer, but I knew that I needed to show something to these writers and illustrators that I wanted to partner with. And so I wrote those books, and I published under my company One More Book, and then once I got their attention, I was able to publish their books under my company. We were, because of maybe social media, the things that we're doing online, got the attention of Scholastic, and now domestically we're distributed through Scholastic book clubs. So yes, I would say the digital world has been very functional, and I think for people who are interested in, because I'm not someone who has an aversion to self-publishing. I mean, my novel is out with Grey Wolf, but if I was to continue, my novel sold in 2015, it didn't come out until 2018, and as I mentioned before, we got a lot of no's because there weren't comps. They were saying, magical realism, maybe not, speculative fiction, and then Black Panther comes out, and it's like, oh, this is amazing. But they wouldn't have had that reaction if it was 2 or 3 years ago, right? And so if I would have continued on that trajectory, I would have considered self-publishing for my novel. It would be the same novel, right? But perhaps a different time. It doesn't exist within like this trend of African speculative fiction, so it would be received differently, but it would be the same piece of work. And I think that that's something that we shouldn't forget, is that having, as you said before, authority and the stamp and having validation from some of these companies and industries, it's really understanding that these industries and this company is really functioning off of trend and comps. So they're publishing things that they know will sell based on what's already sold before. And that's unfortunate because where's the innovation? Where are the new voices, right? So no, I'm not against self-publishing, and the digital world has been very instrumental in the success of One More Book.
How's that working out? How long have you been putting that out for? Start, in other words.
Yeah, so it started in 2011 is when I started with the pilot series books, but then expanded on that in about 2013 or so, and then in 2015 we got nonprofit status. And so we're still moving forward right now, trying to build capacity, if anything, and going through this next year and host fundraisers and also translate some of our books that are by Liberian authors into the 16 indigenous languages. So we're really looking at translation as a form and something that we do, and then elevating our partnership with Scholastic to reach more kids here, because what I find is that even children in the United States are looking for books that give them access to the world outside of our country and then the world outside of like Western vantage points. Because what you find is specifically books that are about anywhere on the continent of Africa, it's like the main characters are usually animals. And so you're not really seeing the people, the humanity of the members of this continent. And I think that's a disservice. So trying to publish things that are outside of the Western context and Western understanding.
Okay, is there one more question? Any more questions? I want to thank our panel, Mike, of course, Kai, and Wayetu Moore. I thought they did a fantastic job. So let's go ahead and give them a round of applause.
Thank you so much for coming.
Thank you.